مرحبا بكم مشاهدينا في حوارات السياق. أبلغ الرئيس الفرنسي مانويل ماكرون نظيره الأمريكي جو بايدن أن السعودية والإمارات اقتربتا من سقف إنتاجهما من النفط. بعدها بيوم دعت فرنسا إلى عودة إيران وفنزويلا لأسواق النفط. تحدث هذه التطورات في وقت تعمل فيه الدول الغربية على إبعاد العالم عن الطاقة الروسية. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف تنضم إلينا الدكتورة سارة فاخشوري، مؤسسة ورئيسة لشركة استشارات استراتيجية في مجال الطاقة، لها مكاتب في واشنطن ودبي، وأيضا أستاذة مساعدة في أمن الطاقة في معهد السياسة العالمية. سيدة سارة، مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you for having me.
نبدأ الأسئلة من تغريدة سابقة لك ذكرت فيها أن إيران أرسلت نفطا خاما إلى الاتحاد الأوروبي في الشهرين الماضيين وأن ذلك موثق. كيف وما هي الكمية؟
So we do not track the tankers, so there might be more than this. But what we detected, it was very small cargoes that each one was about 1 million barrels of oil, but they were all documented to go to Europe. Now, as I said, we do not track tankers, but this is very important because since President Trump's sanctions, maximum pressure against Iran, and embargo on Iran's oil export, no European countries imported Iranian oil. And Iranian oil was never imported formally in Europe. I mean, there might be some, I don't know, like sanctioned oil mixed with other oil going to some countries, all those informal clandestine types of selling oil, exporting oil to different regions. But having that documented in a formal way, this is historically unprecedented.
إيه، لكنك ذكرت أيضا أن الأمر لم يكن ليتم لو لم تمنح الولايات المتحدة ضوءا أخضر لحدوث ذلك.
Well, I do not have any fact that there was a permission, but yes, European companies would not import or sign any document with Iran to import oil unless there is some sort of green light for importing the Iranian oil from U.S. government. And just because we know the companies, we know that even if they don't rely on just word of mouth, there should be some sort of guarantee because they are worried of punishments or implications of importing sanctioned oil. This is not just the case of Iran. Also, we saw that two companies, Eni and Repsol, they chartered tankers and they sent their tankers to Venezuela to import Venezuela oil, which is another sanctioned oil. So there are some indications that they might have received some sort of waivers. But something that I like to note is that these are very small cargoes and they might be just a debt repayment agreement that these companies had with these countries before the sanctions, which means that these companies had investment or sold some services to Iran or Venezuela, that in return for that, they were receiving oil. But because of sanction, that process has stopped and now they resume that. So we are not sure that if this is a new purchase or if they are giving money or a new income to these two countries, but they might just be as part of the debt repayment.
ما لدينا الآن هو أن فرنسا دعت لعودة فنزويلا وإيران إلى أسواق النفط. هل يحل ذلك الأزمة الحالية؟
Well, we are now at the stage that the world is in a global energy crisis. This is historically unprecedented because we had before oil crisis, but not energy crisis at this scale. And this is having impact on inflation, on global economy, and might cause a global food security. Obviously, Iran and Venezuela, both of them, they don't have the capacity to cover for all of Russian oil export. So having Iran and Venezuelan oil in the market does not mean that the world can completely put an embargo on Russian oil, at least at this stage. But any additional barrels of oil helps the market and is crucial for the market, especially now that we have officials like French officials, Macron, being quoted saying that UAE is already producing at the maximum level and Saudi Arabia has very little additional capacity left. We also know that United States has already released significant amount of oil from its strategic petroleum reserves. So if we hit the winter, if there is any natural disaster, if there is any hurricane in US that hit the US production, or if there is any geopolitical tension that could hit or interrupt supply of any suppliers in the market, that could be very dangerous geopolitically for market, because the market have very little, almost no spare capacity left. So yes, having Venezuelan and Iranian, or as what French and French companies called it, any resource that is available in the market, if that's in the market, obviously that's going to help with current prices, with current crisis. And if there's any potential factor that could interrupt the energy market, having all the sources in the market helps. But as I said, the two countries putting the numbers together, they cannot cover for all of Russian oil. So we cannot expect that having Iranian and Venezuelan oil in the market and then put a full embargo on Russian oil, at least at the time that we are talking together.
إذا أردنا أن نؤشر إلى الأسباب الحقيقية وراء الأزمة النفطية الحالية، ما هي؟
The crisis, the roots of crisis goes back before war, and it's not just the Russia-Ukraine war. What happened is that when the COVID hit the market, most of the investors stopped investing in energy, especially oil, and also natural gas. So the investment starts shrinking significantly because the demand shrank, and we had a demand shock because of COVID. And also the other factor that discouraged the investment in the oil and gas industry was all the environmental policies and the encouraging investors to invest in renewables and divest and reduce their investments in fossil fuel. So what happened, we had a significant lack of investment in building capacity for fossil fuel, especially oil and natural gas. And as the vaccination is spread around the world and demand started growing in a very healthy way, because of that lack of investment, the supply did not increase that rapidly. So we had the demand increasing, but the supply didn't match the demand increase. And that's where we are now. We had a supply shrink and supply shortage in the market. When the war happened, that just exacerbated the effect of lack of investment, because obviously Russia is a very huge and significant producer and exporter of natural gas and oil. And some of the, obviously the war tension, but also some of those sanctions, or I would say self-sanctions or voluntary sanctions that United States and Europe particularly put against importing Russian oil, that created that that kind of exaggerated and increased that shortage in the market. Something that is very interesting now is that the flow of oil has changed, reversed. Historically, the Gulf producers, most of the Gulf producers' oil was going to the East Suez Canal, to China, to India, to east of Suez Canal, and Russian oil was mostly going to Europe. This is because obviously the proximity, distance, and the economic sense. But now what is happening, as Europe is trying to cut back its import from Russia, most of the Gulf production, like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iraq particularly, most of their export is going to Russia, and Russian oil is being exported to Asia, to countries like China or India. So we see the flow of oil has changed, even though this is not economic and might be reversed back if the situation is normal again. But we could think that if Europe for a long term wants to win itself off from Russian oil and wants to continue importing oil from Gulf countries, then we have to look at the change of geopolitics, because these new trade ties and change of oil trade flow could have geopolitical impacts and could just have new implications in the market.
بما أنك ذكرت السعودية والإمارات، تعرفين أنهما يتعرضان لضغوط كثيرة منذ أشهر لزيادة الإنتاج النفطي. هل الحل لدى هاتين الدولتين؟
It's very unfortunate, no, because first of all, what happened when the war broke and West, I mean US, particularly US Biden administration, when they reached out to OPEC and asked OPEC to increase their production more than what they are doing now and to cover for Russian oil, OPEC Secretary General, His Excellency Barkindo, he was very, I mean, he brought the fact, is like, it's numbers. Look at the numbers. The OPEC doesn't have that spare capacity to cover for 7 million barrels of oil and liquid export that Russia does. We can't. It's a fact. We cannot. It's numbers. So yes, they constantly, there has been constant pressure on OPEC, particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE, to increase their production. But Saudi Arabia and UAE, they produce as much as they were committed to the market. And if you look at it, during the COVID time that the demand shocked, and after the COVID recovery, when the demand started increasing, in those both incidents, we see that Saudi Arabia, UAE, and OPEC, they were very committed in balancing the market. When there was an oversupply in the market, they voluntarily cut back their production to help the market to balance itself. And then when the market needed more oil, according to their plan, they started increasing their production. So they did what they could do. But the fact is that Russia is a major oil exporter, and you can, I mean, it's oil field, you know, you can put people under political pressure, but that's as much as oil we have, that's a fact. They can produce more than what they can produce. Also, another important thing that policymaker, some of the recent statements from White House indicates that now there has been this realization that the market problem is not just the crude oil supply, but also refinery capacity. So even if OPEC would increase more oil and they had more oil, crude oil, to put in the market, we would still in the United States have high gasoline prices. Why? Because we are having lack and shortage of refinery capacity. And why that happened? Because of many of those ESG and environmental policies, many refineries, especially in the United States, especially in East Coast of United States that I live, they start closing and decommissioning these refineries. So what happened is that even if we have oil in the market, if we don't have enough refinery, we cannot produce the fuel that is required. And that's what happened in the United States. We decommissioned many of those refineries because of ESG purposes, and we were importing significant or a big portion of the unfinished gasoline was coming from Russia. So when we put the sanctions on Russian import of Russian energy sources, which I agree morally, it's important not to help Russia with its income to subsidize a war. But what happened is like you kind of pull that blanket of fuel from the especially east part of United States. And that's why we are having high fuel prices. But if you look at it, which country could add fuel to the market? That's China. So it seems that West, we're pressing a wrong button, and that's the OPEC button. Keep putting pressure on OPEC to pump more oil when the market needs more fuel and not just crude oil. So if they wanted to reach out to any country, the only country that now, as of we are speaking, has a spare petroleum products capacity is China. Before the war, when the COVID happened, China put a suspension on the export of its refined petroleum products. So if West wanted to find a solution, if they would reach out to China, and if there was some sort of agreement that China would remove that suspensions on export of its petroleum products, and it would increase its capacity and export for refinery as it could, then maybe that would be helpful to the market. So I think the policymakers were a bit late in understanding what is exactly the technical issues and the root of problem in the energy market, and especially oil and fuel market, gasoline crisis that we are having.
إذا ما بنينا على أقوالك ووجهنا إصبع الحل إلى الصين ومسألة قدرات التكرير، لماذا يتم التسويق لزيارة بايدن للسعودية على أنها ستقدم حلولا لمشكلات أمن الطاقة العالمية؟
Well, the thing is that I think Saudi Arabia was very upfront with talking about what is their capacity and what they can do. So I mean, it's nice that leaders meet each other. I mean, okay, the President Biden goes to Saudi Arabia. I don't know. I'm not a politician. I think that any meeting could be positive, but Saudi Arabia has been always upfront about the capacity, how much they can add, and the fact that again, Russian production is so huge, and the share of Russian export, it's not easy to being substituted by Saudi Arabia. And if Saudi Arabia today produces at maximum level, which according to French officials, again quoting Macron, Saudi Arabia has very little spare capacity left. If that's true, then we are in a very vulnerable market, because Saudi Arabia historically would, and OPEC in general, but most of that spare capacity was in Saudi Arabia, then after that UAE, but mostly Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had always kept a huge, I mean, significant number, volumes of spare capacity that was used in the event of tension, geopolitical tension in the market, or an event that there is this supply interruption in the market. And if that spare capacity is already used in the market, also United States using a huge volumes of its strategic petroleum reserves, what will happen if tomorrow there is some natural or political reason that creates an interruption in the market? Then the psychological impact, the worry in the market will be really pushing the prices high. But I mean, the oil market is fascinating because it's very, there's so many different factors. Like, as you see, the prices of oil started going down in the recent weeks. The reason for that is now the traders are expecting a global recession next year, which is a bad news, but that will impact the demand. So if US and many major economies in the world in next year go into recession, or their economy significantly slow down, this means the demand for oil will be reduced, and that means lower energy prices. So there are so many different factors, but what scares me, or what concerns me, is not just the fuel prices or oil prices, but the food security, because the prices of oil and gasoline is obviously, if it's higher transportation cost, increases the cost of food because it's transported. But also we have an issue of fertilizer. A lot of fertilizing factories in Europe started reducing their production or closing even before the war break, because natural gas prices were so high in Europe that it was not economic for them to produce fertilizer. And this again has been exaggerated since war, and since the Russia-Ukraine war, and since the energy crisis, because the gas prices are so high. And so if you look at Europe, the gas supplies to Europe are short. So producing electricity for households or major industry, that's the priority. Fertilizers goes to the second or third priorities. Power generation from natural gas is obviously the first priority. So we are going to have or see already the food prices around the world has unfortunately have increased, but we might see further increase. And so I think we might have a hard year or two, but yes, as I said, I think policymakers, they were a bit late in understanding the real cause of the problems, and they were pushing wrong buttons. I hope things change.
أظهرت الأزمة الحالية عدم استعداد العالم لتطبيق الكثير من السياسات المتعلقة بالمناخ، كإغلاق مؤسسات التكرير في الولايات المتحدة، كما ذكرت كذلك موضوع المبيدات. هل حانت لحظة مواجهة الحقيقة حول أولويات المناخ؟
This is a good question. I think the current energy crisis and war was a good wake-up call for the policy leaders and governments to understand that we can't have an energy transition from fossil fuel to renewables without considering the energy security and national security. Yes, the environment is important, the climate change is real, is happening, but the solution should have few characteristics. First of all, it should be affordable. You can't produce net zero oil. You can't produce an oil that in the whole process, no carbon has been emitted by using technologies like CCS or CCSU, but that increases the cost. Who is going to bear the cost? When the cost of energy production increases, me and you and other people have to pay higher amount of cost for our energy. Well, people maybe in UAE, United States can pay for premium energy costs, but there are so many countries, especially in emerging market, in Africa, in India, in many countries that they cannot afford paying a premium price for energy, for that clean energy. And that is going to increase the energy poverty and reduces energy access, because there are communities, Black, dark communities, that already cannot afford paying for the power and electricity. And if you increase the price, that will be even worse. And again, everything is connected. If you don't have electricity, you don't have safe water. You cannot preserve your food or agriculture. So this is like a chain of consequences. So I think the energy transition should be wise in a way that we should consider the energy and national security, but also the affordability is very important. While we should be mindful of technologies, mindful of the resources and the pollution. Also, looking at the renewable energy, there is a lot of minerals involved. So we are going to have significant need for mining, for extracting these minerals, which all of that are harmful to our climate, to our earth, to the earth. They're all very energy intensive. They are highly emitting pollutions. So if there is no carbon coming out of my car exhaust, doesn't mean that my car, in the whole process of my car being produced, let's say like an electronic vehicle, it doesn't mean that there wasn't any pollution happening all now. And then the geopolitical implications of where those resources are coming, all of that. These are all very important, but something that no one talks about it. We always talk about supply. When we're talking about environment, we are thinking that where that supply can come, how can we have a clean energy, how we substitute fuel. No one talks about demand, the demand transition. And this is a question that now that the energy crisis is happening, prices are higher, people and governments also should think about how can we reduce the demand growth at least, or manage that demand growth. I have worked with the UAE government. UAE is actually one of those countries that they are very mindful of their demand, both power and water. So demand management, both for water consumption and power consumption, in UAE, for instance, that now we're talking and you're based, is very crucial. And I think we need more countries to be mindful and have programs for their demand management. How can we have a more efficient ways of consuming both electricity, energy, fuel, and also water? I think this is also should be a big part of energy transition as we are discussing where the supply should come from. We should also look at demand.
المتابع لقمة السبعة الكبار يلاحظ أنهم دعوا كلا من الهند والسنغال دولة أفريقية لثنيهما عن استيراد النفط الروسي في الوقت نفسه. هل من بدائل عن النفط الروسي؟
You know, I mean, believe me, I don't like wars, and I don't like what is happening in Ukraine. I wish that the world could bring Russian exports and Russian revenue to zero. But again, as an expert, if you look at the numbers and you look at possibilities, today there is no short, quick fix for Russian supplies. There's no quick fix. If you're looking in 10 years or 20 years, maybe by then we could think of a world that we have completely moved from Russian oil and gas export. But now, as of now that we are sitting here, we can't completely substitute Russian oil because energy infrastructure is so massive. by the time you build a capacity to substitute that, you're going to have, it takes time. And if you look at it, for instance, in Europe, that they're so concerned about energy transition, also globally, the consumption of coal has skyrocketed. The price of coal has also skyrocketed. What does this mean? If we want to purchase, for instance, less oil or gas from Russia, that is a major player in the market, we have to look at other sources. We cannot in one day build new nuclear power plant. It takes 10 years to add nuclear power plant, and already Europe decommissioned many of its nuclear power plant after the Fukushima disaster. So yes, now France announces that they want to add certain numbers of nuclear power plant to generate power for their country, but that takes at least a decade. So today, next year, no, there is no quick fix. There is really no quick answer and a complete substitute. But yes, if we have another, like at the beginning, we talked about sanctioned oil, like in Venezuela or Iran, consuming less. So using other resources could help the market and politicians to reduce Russia's export or Russia's revenue. But even if you look at Russia's revenue, this year, Russia made more money, even though that was exporting less volumes of oil than last year, because the prices were much higher.
وهنا أود أن أسألك عن سبب تحقيقهم لهكذا مداخيل في ظل العقوبات.
Because the prices went up. Well, now there are, because again, like looking at India or China, I mean, now let's looking at India. Well, India is a major consumer of energy, and energy is crucial for stability of the country, for national security of the country. So you cannot tell India not import oil, $30 discounted per barrel oil from Russia. But now what they're trying to do is that they now introduce a new policy, which they call it put a price cap on Russian oil exports. And that's because the market cannot put an embargo on Russian oil and still need to import Russian oil. Let the world import the Russian oil, but put a cap on the prices. But then this is easier to said than done, because you cannot say, India, you can import as much as Russian oil you want, but don't pay Russia more than $20 per barrel. Why? Because then Russia tomorrow will say, sorry, I'm not exporting any oil to the world at $20 per barrel. And then the prices of oil will increase to $150 or $200. So it's not that easy to implement those policies. For instance,
اعذريني على المقاطعة، هل يمكن أن يحدد المشتري السعر وليس البائع أو المنتج في هذه الحالة؟
No, we have different markets. We have buyers markets or sellers market, and buyers obviously are determining the prices, because, for instance, if the prices of gasoline is $10 per gallon, I'm not going to buy any more gasoline, and then the seller has to reduce the prices. So yes, the buyer can also decide if it's going to buy or not at that price. But what I'm saying is that it's easy. It's not that easy, because the volumes of Russian exports is huge. So it's hard for the world or for US to dictate a price on Russian oil, because what if Russia says, I'm not exporting any oil, and tomorrow the prices will skyrocket? And the good example of that is in natural gas. When Europe decided to reduce its gas and oil imports from Russia, one day Russia announced that they are not going to sell any gas to Hungary. And Hungary is not really one of the major importers of Russian gas. And we saw that just one country, that announcement that Russia did, increased the gas prices significantly. And that was just like little portion of Russian gas export to Europe. So again, all these policies are like, I would say, trial. We try and see how it's work. This is a new policy, put a price cap. Would it work? We don't know. I don't know. We have to wait to see what is the result. But I could think that because again, Russia knows that it's exporting a significant volume of oil, it might not agree for that price gap. But at the end of the day, what is the solution for policymakers to stop Russia from expanding its what it's doing, to stop the war, to prevent Russia from doing the same to other countries, or potentially China to Taiwan. So it's also a tough position for politicians in US, in Europe, and they can't just sit quiet. It might be easy for me. I just look at the numbers and tell you what I think is doable, what is not doable. But I think I'm not a politician, so it's very hard to be, I don't know, president of the United States, that you have to make sure the gasoline prices at your home are on affordable prices. Your policies will not create a recession in your country because you're going to lose or your party will lose the election, but also try to have that international impact and do what people expect you to do.
شكرا جزيلا لك سارة فاخشوري للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you very much for having me.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.